Your sister is losing her home, Clara. Are you really going to let your own nephew and niece end up on the street just because of some college funds you won't even need for another 15 years? My mother's voice didn't rise to a shout. It didn't need to. It was that tight, suffocating whisper she used when she wanted to crush me into submission without leaving a bruise. Barbara had always possessed that unique talent, the ability to slice you open with a butter knife and make you apologize for bleeding on her floor. I stood frozen by the kitchen island, gripping the edge of the granite countertop so hard my knuckles turned white. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the room, illuminating the three people who had somehow managed to turn my own home into an interrogation cell. My mother stood at the head of the island, her arms crossed over her pristine cashmere sweater. My father, Richard, leaned against the doorframe, serving as the silent, imposing enforcer, blocking my only exit. And then there was Megan, my older sister, the golden child. She sat at my kitchen table, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, wearing a silk blouse that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The air in the room was thick, smelling faintly of the expensive lavender perfume Megan bathed in, completely overpowering the scent of the cheap coffee I had brewed just an hour before they ambushed me. "I'm not asking for a handout, Clara," Megan sniffled, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "It's a loan, just to cover the down payment and the immediate debts. The bank is breathing down my neck. You know how hard it's been for me since, well, you know. I just need a little help to secure the new house. For the kids. How can you be so selfish when you have $500,000 just sitting there collecting dust?" I looked at the three of them, a familiar, sickening weight settling in my stomach. The guilt. It was an old friend, a heavy coat they had forced me to wear since I was a child. But tonight, something inside me had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't the scared little girl anymore. I was a 32-year-old widow, and I was a mother. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence stretch until the tension in the kitchen became almost unbearable. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked directly into my sister's eyes and spoke 5 words that would fracture my family forever. "Not one single dime, Megan," my mother gasped, a sharp theatrical intake of breath. "Clara, how can you speak to your sister like that? Have we raised you to be this cold, this calculating?" "The money doesn't belong to me, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It belongs to Noah and Lily. David left it for their future. It is in an ironclad trust. It's not an emergency fund for Megan's lifestyle choices." "Lifestyle choices?" Megan slammed her hands on the table, dropping the fragile victim act instantly, her face contorted with genuine rage. "I am trying to keep a roof over my children's heads. We are family. Family helps family, Clara. Or did David wash all the loyalty out of your brain before he died?" The mention of my late husband's name in her venomous tone made my vision swim with red. David, the only man who had ever truly seen me, who had loved me without conditions, and who had spent the last agonizing months of his life making sure my family could never destroy the safety net he built for our children. "Get out," I whispered. "What?" My father finally spoke, stepping forward from the doorway, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Now, Clara, let's not be hasty. We can go to the bank tomorrow. We can figure out a way to restructure the trustee—" "I said get out!" I raised my voice, the sound bouncing off the tiled backsplash. "Get out of my house. Now." For a moment, nobody moved. They were so accustomed to my compliance, so used to me bending backward to keep the peace, that my defiance completely short-circuited their brains. But I didn't break eye contact. I stood tall, channeling every ounce of strength David had left me. Finally, muttering curses under their breath, they gathered their designer coats and marched out of my front door. The slam of the heavy oak door echoed through the house, leaving behind a profound, ringing silence. I collapsed against the kitchen counter, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. I slid down to the cold tile floor, pulled my knees to my chest, and buried my face in my hands. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and my hands shook so violently I couldn't even unlock my phone. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. When my breathing finally steadied, I stood up and walked silently down the hallway. I pushed open the door to Noah's room. He was 7 years old, sprawled across his bed, one arm draped over his favorite stuffed bear. I adjusted his blanket, my fingers lightly brushing his warm forehead. Then I walked across the hall to Lily's room. She was only 4, curled into a tiny, peaceful ball. Looking at them, sleeping so soundly, entirely unaware of the ugly, greedy world outside their bedroom doors, the remnants of my anxiety vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. My parents and my sister thought I was weak. They thought they could bully me, guilt-trip me, and gaslight me into handing over my children's future. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot that a mother protecting her young is the most dangerous creature on earth. To understand how my family reached this point of spectacular moral decay, you have to understand the dynamic that governed the house I grew up in. In the grand play of our family, the roles were assigned early and written in permanent marker. Megan was the star. I was the stagehand. Megan was 4 years older than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was Barbara and Richard's crowning achievement. She was a pretty child, outgoing, demanding, and inherently manipulative. Traits my parents somehow interpreted as leadership and charm. If Megan wanted ballet lessons, my parents found the money, even if it meant skipping utility bills. If Megan threw a tantrum because she didn't get the lead in the middle school play, my mother would march down to the school and threaten the drama teacher. I, on the other hand, was quiet. I liked to read. I kept my head down, got straight A's, and tried my hardest not to be a burden. In a healthy family, this would be appreciated. In my family, it meant I was invisible. Or worse, I was useful. Clara doesn't mind wearing Megan's hand-me-downs, do you, sweetie? You're so practical, my mother would say, patting my head while handing Megan a credit card to go shopping for a new homecoming dress. Clara, why don't you stay home and watch the dog this weekend? Megan needs a break. She's been so stressed with her social life, my father would add, completely ignoring the fact that I had my own finals to study for. It was 1,000 tiny cuts over 2 decades. They conditioned me to believe that my needs were secondary, that my primary purpose in the family ecosystem was to support Megan's happiness. When it came time for college, my parents sat me down with somber faces. Clara, my father had said, clearing his throat, we've run the numbers. With Megan's out-of-state tuition and her sorority dues, things are incredibly tight. We know you're smart. You can get scholarships, take out some loans. You're strong, Clara. You can handle a state school and a part-time job. Megan is delicate. She needs the private university environment to thrive. So, I worked. I waited tables for 4 years, smelling like stale fry grease, taking 18 credit hours a semester while Megan posted photos from spring break in Cabo, entirely funded by the emergency credit card my parents gave her. I graduated with honors and $40,000 in student loan debt. Megan graduated a year later, debt-free, with a degree in communications that she immediately abandoned because working entry-level jobs was beneath her. I thought moving out and starting my career as an accountant would free me. But distance doesn't cure a toxic family dynamic. It only changes the battleground. Whenever Megan ran into trouble, which was often, considering her terrifying lack of financial literacy, my parents would come to me. Clara, your sister's car broke down. Could you lend her $1,000? You have that good corporate job now. Family helps family. Clara, Megan's rent is due and she's between jobs again. Be a good sister. Don't be so stingy. If I said no, the punishment was swift and brutal. The silent treatment from my mother, the disappointed sighs from my father, the passive-aggressive Facebook posts from Megan about how some people let a little bit of money change who they are. It was easier to just write the check. It was easier to pay the extortion fee for a few weeks of manufactured familial peace. And then I met David. David was a structural engineer. He was steady, logical, and incredibly kind. He was the kind of man who measured twice and cut once in both his work and his life. When we started dating, I tried to hide the reality of my family from him. I made excuses for why Megan never asked about my day, or why my parents only called when they needed me to co-sign something. But David wasn't blind. He watched them for 6 months before he finally intervened. It happened at a Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. Megan had just casually mentioned that she wanted to open a boutique and expected my parents to remortgage their house to fund it. When my parents hesitated, Megan immediately turned her sights on us. Well, David makes great money, right? And Clara is an accountant. You guys could be my angel investors. Megan beamed, an entitled smile plastered across her face. I opened my mouth, ready to deliver my usual apologetic refusal that would inevitably lead to a fight, but David gently placed his hand over mine under the table. No, David said. His voice was polite, but it held the absolute firmness of concrete. The table went dead silent. Megan blinked, her smile faltering. Excuse me? No, we won't be investing, David repeated calmly, taking a sip of his water. We are saving for a house, and Clara is aggressively paying down her student loans. Loans she had to take because her college fund was reallocated. We don't have capital for high-risk ventures. My mother's face turned the color of a bruised plum. David, in this family, we support each other's dreams. Barbara, with all due respect, supporting a dream doesn't mean funding a delusion, David replied, not breaking eye contact. If Megan has a solid business plan, she can take it to a bank. But Clara's days of subsidizing her sister's lifestyle are over. I had never felt a rush of adrenaline quite like that. Nobody had ever stood up for me. Nobody had ever looked at my family and explicitly called out the exploitation. We left dinner early that night. In the car ride home, I burst into tears, a messy release of 25 years of repressed anger. David just held my hand, letting me cry until there was nothing left. "They don't love you the way you deserve to be loved, Clara," he told me quietly in the dark of our car. "They love what you can do for them. From now on, I'm the bad guy. You blame everything on me. You tell them your husband controls the finances. You protect your peace. I'll protect you." We got married a year later. We bought a modest, beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood with good public schools. We had Noah, and 3 years later, we had Lily. For a few glorious years, I knew what true happiness felt like. David kept his promise. Whenever my parents came calling for money for Megan's latest disaster, David stepped in and shut it down. My family hated him for it, but they respected his boundaries because he simply didn't care about their guilt trips. He was immune to their gaslighting. We were building a beautiful, quiet life. And then the universe decided we had been happy for too long. David started getting headaches, just dull, persistent aches behind his eyes that he blamed on staring at blueprints for too long. Then came the dizziness. Then the morning he couldn't remember how to tie his own shoes. The diagnosis was a glioblastoma, brain cancer, aggressive, fast-moving, and terminal. The doctor gave us a timeline of 12 to 15 months. My entire world, the beautiful, safe reality David and I had built, collapsed in a single afternoon in a sterile, white-walled clinic. I remember sitting in the parking lot of the hospital, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands cramped, screaming until my throat bled. But David, true to his nature, didn't panic. After the initial shock wore off, the engineer in him took over. He viewed his impending death as a structural failure he needed to plan for. He wanted to make sure the foundation he left behind for me and the kids would never crack. During his treatments, between rounds of chemotherapy and radiation that stripped the flesh from his bones, David spent hours on his laptop, organizing our finances. He had a substantial life insurance policy, nearly $700,000. Combined with his retirement accounts and our savings, he knew I would be financially secure. But he also knew something else. He knew my family. One afternoon, about 8 months into his illness, David asked me to bring him his phone. He was lying in the hospital bed we had set up in our living room, his face pale, his eyes sunken, but his mind sharp. "I called Arthur," David said, his voice raspy. Arthur was a senior partner at a prestigious law firm in the city, a man David had consulted for complex engineering contracts in the past. "He's coming over this afternoon." "Arthur, why?" I asked, wiping a damp washcloth across his forehead. "David, we have our wills sorted. Everything goes to me, then the kids. It's simple." David reached out, his frail hand gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Clara, look at me. It's not simple. When I'm gone, your parents and Megan are going to descend on you like vultures. They are going to see that life insurance payout not as a tragedy, but as a windfall, a lottery ticket." "I won't give them anything," I promised, tears pricking my eyes. "I know better now, David. I'm strong." "I know you're strong, my love," he smiled weakly. "But grief makes people vulnerable. Grief makes you tired, and your family is relentless. If Megan gets into real trouble, and your mother starts crying, and your father starts telling you how disappointed he is, I won't be here to be the bad guy. I won't be here to say no." He took a labored breath, his chest rattling. "So we are going to build a fortress. I'm taking $500,000 from the insurance payout and putting it directly into an irrevocable trust fund for Noah and Lily. It will be explicitly earmarked for their education, housing, or starting a business when they turn 25. $500,000? I breathed. It was a staggering amount of money. Yes, it's their future. I won't be here to pay for their college, or walk Lily down the aisle, or help Noah buy his first home. This money is my way of taking care of them when I can't be here. David's eyes hardened. And we are going to make it bulletproof. Arthur is going to draft the trust documents so tight that not even God could break them open early. You will be the sole trustee, Clara, but the conditions for withdrawal will be legally restricted to the children's direct benefit. No loans, no family emergencies, no helping Megan. When Arthur arrived, he brought the gravitas of a seasoned litigator into our living room. He was a tall man in his late 50s with sharp gray eyes and a demeanor that commanded absolute respect. He sat beside David's bed, listened carefully to my husband's concerns about my family, and nodded grimly. I've seen this 100 times, David, Arthur said, adjusting his glasses. Wealth transfers, especially after unexpected deaths, bring out the absolute worst in extended families. The entitlement is a disease. I will structure this trust with a heavily restricted discretionary clause. Clara will manage the investments, but any attempt to liquidate the principal for third-party use will trigger immediate legal flags. I will also add a clause naming my firm as a secondary oversight guardian. If anyone tries to pressure Clara into signing over her trustee rights, my firm has to legally approve the transfer. And I assure you, we will never approve it. Watching David and Arthur work was like watching two architects design a vault. They thought of every loophole, every manipulation tactic my family might try, and they sealed it shut with impenetrable legal jargon. When David passed away 3 months later, the grief was a physical agony that threatened to swallow me whole. I was 29 years old, a widow with a 4-year-old and an infant, standing over a casket on a rainy Tuesday. My parents and Megan were at the funeral, of course. Megan wore a custom-tailored black dress that looked more suited for a gala than a graveyard, and my mother spent the reception telling everyone who would listen how exhausted she was from supporting her poor, tragic daughter. In the immediate aftermath of David's death, my family actually behaved. They brought casseroles, offered to watch the kids, and played the role of the supportive village. I was drowning in sorrow, desperately grateful for any lifeline, and for a brief, foolish window of time, I thought that losing David had somehow reset our family dynamic. I thought that the sheer magnitude of my tragedy had shocked them into becoming the parents and sister I had always wanted. It took exactly 14 months for the illusion to shatter. Once the dust settled, once I returned to work and established a grueling routine as a single mother, the old patterns began to emerge from the shadows. It started subtly. My mother would call, complaining about the rising cost of groceries, dropping heavy hints about how comfortable David must have left me. Megan started inviting me out to expensive dinners, just us girls, and then conveniently forgetting her wallet when the $300 check arrived. I paid, telling myself it was just dinner. I was tired, too tired to fight. Then Megan's life began to spiral, though she painted a masterpiece of a facade on social media. According to her Instagram, Megan was thriving. She had married a man named Kyle, a personal trainer with a penchant for leased luxury cars and cryptos. They lived in a trendy downtown loft, drank expensive champagne, and went on frequent vacations. But behind the filters, the reality was a financial horror show. Kyle's crypto investments had tanked. Megan's latest venture, an upscale event planning business, was bleeding money. They were living entirely on maxed-out credit cards, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of wealth to their social circle. The tension reached a boiling point when Megan announced she was pregnant. Instead of moving to a sensible home in the suburbs, she and Kyle decided they needed to buy a massive 5-bedroom estate in a gated community. "It's about the school district, Clara," Megan had told me over the phone, her voice shrill with manic energy. "And the networking. You have to surround yourself with successful people if you want to be successful. We found the perfect house. It's $1.2 million. It's a steal." "Megan, how are you going to afford the mortgage on $1 million house?" I asked gently, bouncing a fussy lily on my hip while trying to stir a pot of macaroni on the stove. "Have you guys sat down with a financial advisor?" "Don't be so condescending, Clara," Megan snapped, the warmth instantly vanishing. "Kyle has investments coming to term. We just need to pull together the 20% down payment. The bank is being ridiculous about our debt-to-income ratio." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The warning bells David had installed in my brain began to ring furiously. "Well, I hope you figure it out," I said, keeping my voice neutral. A week later, the ambush in my kitchen occurred. It wasn't a spontaneous visit. It was a coordinated strike. My mother had called me earlier that day, asking if she and Dad could drop by to see the kids. She knew Noah and Lily went to bed at 8. She knew I would be exhausted from a long day at the accounting firm. She timed it perfectly, bringing Megan along to spring the trap when my defenses were at their lowest. And there we were. The demand for the money, the guilt trip, the gaslighting. Sitting on the floor outside my children's bedroom, I replayed the entire confrontation in my mind. Megan's venomous face, my mother's calculated whispers, my father's silent intimidation. They hadn't come to ask for a favor. They had come to collect what they genuinely believed was theirs. In their twisted worldview, I was still the stagehand, the secondary character whose only purpose was to facilitate the star's success. The fact that the money belonged to my fatherless children didn't even register as a moral hurdle to them. I pulled myself up from the floor, my legs stiff and aching. I walked into my home office, a small room at the back of the house where David used to keep his drafting tables. I booted up my laptop, the blue light harsh in the dark room. I opened my email and composed a new message to Arthur. Arthur, you and David were right. They came for the trust fund tonight. They wanted the money for Megan's new house. I said no and I kicked them out. I need to know exactly what protections we have in place and what steps I need to take to ensure they cannot touch a single cent of Noah and Lily's money. They are desperate, and I think things are going to get much worse. Best, Clara. I hit send, the swoosh of the email echoing in the quiet room. I didn't know it yet, but my refusal in the kitchen wasn't the end of the war. It was merely the declaration of it. I thought setting a boundary would be enough to make them back off. I fundamentally underestimated the depths of Megan's desperation and the lengths to which my parents would go to protect their golden child. They weren't just going to accept my no. They were going to try and destroy me to get to that vault. And the first weapon they would use wouldn't be guilt. It would be a crime. The morning after the confrontation in my kitchen, the house felt different. It wasn't just quiet. It was a heavy, bruised kind of silence, the kind that follows a terrible storm. I woke up at 5:30 with a dull ache behind my eyes, my jaw tight from grinding my teeth in my sleep. I walked into the kitchen, the scene of last night's crime. The faint scent of my sister's lavender perfume still lingered in the air, a sickening reminder of the ambush. I opened the windows, letting the crisp, early morning autumn breeze sweep through the house, desperate to physically air out the toxicity they had brought into my safe space. As I poured my coffee, I heard the soft padding of little feet down the hallway. Noah appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in every direction, clutching his worn-out teddy bear. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, sweetie," I said, forcing a bright, steady smile. I knelt down and pulled him into a tight hug. He smelled like baby shampoo and warm cotton. A fierce, almost primal wave of protectiveness washed over me. This is who I fight for, I reminded myself. Not for my pride, for him, for Lily. Getting the kids ready for school and daycare was a blur of packing lunches, tying tiny shoes, and wiping oatmeal off faces. It was the beautiful, chaotic routine of single motherhood, a routine that required all my bandwidth and left no room for breaking down. I kissed them both goodbye at the drop-off line, watching Noah march into his elementary school with his oversized backpack. Once I was alone in my car, heading to the accounting firm where I worked as a senior auditor, the adrenaline of the morning faded, leaving me alone with my dread. I knew my family. I knew their playbook. The direct assault had failed, which meant the psychological warfare was about to begin. I didn't have to wait long. It started around noon. I was sitting at my desk, eating a sad turkey sandwich and reviewing a client's quarterly tax filings when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from my cousin, Sarah, who lived 2 states away and usually only reached out on holidays. Sarah: "Oh my God, Clara, I just saw Megan's post. Is everything okay? Please tell me it's a misunderstanding." My stomach plummeted. My fingers felt numb as I unlocked my phone and opened Facebook. I didn't even have to navigate to Megan's page. The algorithm had served it right to the top of my feed, heavily boosted by dozens of comments and angry reactions. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Megan had posted a black and white photo of her 2 toddlers looking forlornly out a window. The caption was a sprawling 1,000-word essay dripping with manufactured heartbreak. "I never thought I would have to write something like this," the post began. "Family is supposed to be your safe harbor. When Kyle and I hit a rough patch, we thought we could rely on our blood. We thought that the people who were blessed with immense financial windfalls would remember the importance of supporting their own nieces and nephews. Instead, last night, doors were slammed in our faces. We were told that a massive pile of money sitting in a bank account is more important than keeping a roof over my baby's heads. Tai Sinadan. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. The immense financial windfall was a direct, weaponized reference to David's life insurance. She was publicly framing the tragedy of my husband's death, the worst thing that had ever happened to me, as my lucky lottery ticket. The post continued. It breaks my heart to see how money changes people, how grief can turn someone so bitter and cold. I am terrified for our housing situation, but I am even more terrified of the absolute lack of empathy in this world. Please keep us in your prayers as we try to navigate this betrayal. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read the comments, watching my own reputation be systematically dismantled by extended family and family friends who had known me since I was a child. Aunt Susan, I am so sorry, Megan. Your grandfather would be spinning in his grave if he knew how selfish your sister has become. Linda, my mother's best friend. Unbelievable. After everything your parents did for her. Let me know if you need a place to stay, sweetie. Kyle, Megan's husband. We will get through this, babe. We don't need toxic people in our lives. I pushed my chair back from my desk, my breathing shallow and rapid. It wasn't just the lies that hurt. It was the sheer, calculated cruelty of it. Megan knew exactly what she was doing. She was launching a preemptive strike, controlling the narrative so that if I tried to tell the truth, that she was trying to raid a 4-year-old's college fund to buy $1 million mansion, I would look like the defensive, lying, bitter widow she had painted me to be. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from my mother. I stared at the caller ID for a long moment. Every instinct told me to ignore it, to throw the phone into a drawer and lock it. But a small, foolish part of me, the inner child that still desperately craved her mother's protection, hoped that maybe Barbara was calling to apologize. Maybe she had seen Megan's post and realized things had gone too far. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Mom. Have you seen what you've done? My mother's voice was icy, vibrating with a terrifying, quiet fury. There was no greeting, no asking how I was holding up. What I've done? I whispered, my voice shaking. Mom, did you read what she wrote? She's telling the world I'm letting her kids go homeless. She's twisting David's death into... She is hurting, Clara, my mother snapped, cutting me off with the precision of a guillotine. She is facing the destruction of her family's stability, and she is crying out for help. And instead of acting like a sister, you are acting like a miser hoarding gold. You forced her hand. I forced her hand? The sheer absurdity of the statement snapped something loose inside my chest. The trembling stopped, replaced by a hot, bright flare of anger. Mom, Megan wants to buy a luxury estate in a gated community. She isn't getting evicted. She's trying to upgrade her lifestyle using my dead husband's money. How can you possibly defend this? Don't you dare raise your voice to me, Barbara hissed. You have no idea what financial pressures Kyle and Megan are under. And it doesn't matter what the money is for. What matters is that you have more than enough, and you are refusing to share. You are humiliating us, Clara. The entire extended family is calling me, asking what is wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with me, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I am protecting Noah and Lily. Oh, please. Noah and Lily have a rich mother. They don't need $500,000 locked away while their cousins suffer. If David were here, he would have thrown you all out of my house the second you asked, I yelled. The walls of my small office seemed to vibrate. I had never yelled at my mother in my entire life. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You are a deeply troubled young woman, my mother finally said, her voice dripping with pity. It was her ultimate weapon, the gaslighting pivot. When she couldn't bully me, she would try to convince me I was crazy. Grief has made you paranoid and cruel. Until you are ready to apologize to your sister and act like a part of this family, do not bother calling us. Click, she hung up. I slowly lowered the phone to my desk. The tears finally came, hot and bitter, spilling over my cheeks and spotting the tax documents in front of me. I cried for the mother I never really had, the sister who viewed me as an ATM, and the absolute terrifying isolation of being entirely alone. David was gone. My family had effectively disowned me. It was just me, Noah, and Lily against the world. I spent the rest of the workday functioning on autopilot, checking numbers and sending emails while my mind raced. The social media notifications continued to pile up, a relentless digital stoning. By 3 p.m., I deactivated my Facebook and Instagram accounts. I didn't write a rebuttal. I didn't try to defend myself. Engaging with a narcissist publicly is like wrestling a pig in the mud. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it. Just before I packed up to leave, an email popped into my inbox. It was from Arthur, responding to the frantic message I had sent him the night before. Clara, I am deeply sorry to hear that your family has crossed this line, though I cannot say I am entirely surprised. Please breathe. You are legally secure. The trust David and I established is a fortress. As the sole trustee, only you have the fiduciary power to authorize distributions, and the language explicitly bars those distributions from benefiting anyone other than Noah and Lily. However, desperation breeds creativity. If they are willing to ambush you in your own home, they may escalate. Here is what you need to do immediately. 1. Freeze your personal credit. Sometimes family members possess your social security number and may attempt to open lines of credit in your name. 2. Secure all physical documents. If you have the original birth certificates, social security cards, or copies of the trust documents in your house, move them to a bank safety deposit box tomorrow morning. 3. Document everything. Save every text, every voicemail, and take screenshots of any public smear campaigns. Do not respond to them. I am your legal shield, Clara. If they contact you again demanding money, tell them all communication must go through my office. I am happy to play the villain. Stay strong. David built this wall for a reason. Let it do its job. Best, Arthur. Reading Arthur's words was like being tossed a life preserver in a raging ocean. The panic that had been gripping my chest all day began to loosen. I wasn't just a scared sister or a disappointing daughter anymore. I was a legal entity, backed by a senior partner at a major law firm, armed with airtight contracts. I left the office feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I picked the kids up, took them for pizza, and spent the evening playing board games with them on the living room rug. I laughed at Noah's jokes and braided Lily's hair, soaking in their innocent joy. My family wanted me to feel broken and isolated, but looking at my 2 beautiful, healthy children, I realized I had never been richer. The next few days passed in a tense, terrible silence. My mother made good on her threat. My phone did not ring. Neither my father nor Megan reached out. On Thursday, during my lunch break, I followed Arthur's advice. I went to the local branch of my bank, rented a safety deposit box, and locked away the original trust documents, the kids' birth certificates, and my own sensitive files. I felt a little paranoid doing it. Are they really that crazy? I wondered as the bank clerk handed me the brass key. Would they actually try to steal my documents? I would get my answer the following Monday. It had been exactly 1 week since the confrontation. The digital storm had somewhat passed. Megan had moved on to posting aesthetic photos of her daily lattes, though her captions still featured passive-aggressive quotes about healing from toxic energy. I was beginning to think that the worst was over, that they had finally realized I was a lost cause and decided to leave me alone. I got home from work, juggling a bag of groceries in my laptop bag, while Noah chased Lily across the front lawn. I unlocked the front door, ushered the kids inside, and went back out to check the mailbox. Usually, my mailbox was stuffed with junk mail, grocery circulars, and the occasional bill. But today, the metal box was suspiciously empty, save for one single envelope. It was a letter from First National, the bank that held the kids' trust funds. I frowned, tracing the embossed logo on the corner. The bank rarely sent physical mail anymore. Everything was set up for paperless electronic delivery to my secure portal. I tore the envelope open as I walked into the kitchen, dropping the groceries on the counter. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, a formal notice generated by the bank's fraud and security department. Dear Mrs. Clara Miller, this letter is to notify you of an administrative inquiry regarding account ending in number 4928, the David Miller Irrevocable Family Trust. On October 14th, a request was submitted to our Central Processing Department to initiate a transfer of trustee designation. Due to the high security protocols placed on this account, the request has been temporarily suspended pending your direct in-person authorization. If you did not initiate this request, please contact our fraud department immediately. The paper slipped from my trembling fingers, fluttering to the kitchen floor. October 14th. That was yesterday, a Sunday. Someone had tried to change the name of the trustee. Someone had tried to legally remove my name from my children's $500,000 account and replace it with their own. The paranoia I had felt at the bank a few days prior vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp, terrifying clarity. My family hadn't backed down. They hadn't given up. The silent treatment wasn't a punishment. It was a distraction. While I was busy crying over my mother's rejection and hiding from Megan's Facebook posts, they had been working in the shadows. They weren't just toxic anymore. They had crossed the line into felony fraud. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up the letter from the floor, walked over to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the business card Arthur had given me. It was 5:30 p.m. The law office would be closing soon. I dialed the number, listening to it ring, my eyes fixed on the children playing in the living room. They were trying to steal from Noah. They were trying to steal from Lily. "Arthur speaking." His deep voice crackled through the receiver. "Arthur," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, hardened into something unrecognizable even to myself. "They tried to bypass me. They submitted a request to the bank to change the trustee." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Arthur finally spoke, the polite, comforting tone of a family lawyer was gone. It was replaced by the ruthless edge of a litigator going to war. "Bring the letter to my office tomorrow at 8 a.m., Clara," Arthur said. "It's time to show them what a fortress actually looks like." I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic breathing of my children through the baby monitor. The letter from First National sat on my nightstand like an unexploded bomb. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, heard my father's silence, and felt the chilling reality of what they had attempted to do. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale gray light into my bedroom, I was already dressed. I dropped Noah and Lily at the early care program at their school, kissing their foreheads a little longer than usual. Then I drove downtown. Arthur's law firm was located on the 20th floor of a glass and steel high-rise, a physical manifestation of power and order. The elevator doors opened to a reception area paneled in dark mahogany, smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive coffee. It was exactly the kind of place that would intimidate my parents. For the first time in my life, I was grateful for that kind of ruthless corporate power. It was my armor. Arthur was waiting for me in his corner office. He didn't offer small talk or platitudes. He pointed to the leather chair across from his massive desk and held out his hand. "Show me the letter," he said. I pulled the creased envelope from my purse and handed it over. Arthur put on his reading glasses, his eyes scanning the text with clinical precision. His expression didn't change, but the silence in the room grew heavy, charged with a quiet, dangerous energy. "Transfer of trustee designation," Arthur read aloud, his voice flat. He took off his glasses and dropped them on the desk. "They actually tried it. I warned David they might try to manipulate you into signing the funds over, but this is entirely different, Clara. This is a forged instrument submitted to a federally insured financial institution." "How is that even possible?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins. "The trust is locked. You said it was a fortress." "It is," Arthur replied calmly, "which is exactly why the bank flagged it and sent you this letter. The fortress held, but we need to see exactly what kind of battering ram they tried to use against the gates." Arthur pressed a button on his desk phone, connecting to his paralegal. "Diane, get me Kenneth Vance at First National on the line. Priority 1. We sat in silence while we waited. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, the cars looking like tiny toys. I felt entirely disconnected from the world down there. I was trapped in a nightmare designed by the people who were supposed to love me most. The speakerphone beeped. "Arthur, old friend, what can I do for you this morning?" A crisp, professional voice echoed in the room. "Ken, I have my client, Clara Miller, sitting across from me. We are looking at a fraud alert letter regarding the David Miller Irrevocable Trust. Account ending in 4928. Someone attempted to initiate a trustee transfer on Sunday. I need the scanned copy of the document they submitted. Now." There was a brief pause, the sound of keyboard clacking bleeding through the speaker. "I'm looking at the file, Arthur. The request came through our online secure portal upload. It's a standard declaration of successor trustee form. I'm emailing you the PDF right now. I have to warn you, it looks heavily irregular. The notary stamp is from a different county, and it triggered our secondary verification algorithms immediately." A moment later, Arthur's computer chimed. He opened the attachment and clicked print. The laser printer in the corner of the office hummed to life, spitting out 3 sheets of paper. Arthur gathered them, glanced at the final page, and then slid the document across the desk toward me. Look at the signature, Clara. I pulled the papers closer. It was a dense, legal form declaring that Clara Miller, being of sound mind, was voluntarily relinquishing her fiduciary duties and appointing Megan Miller as the sole successor trustee, granting her full discretionary access to all funds. But it was the bottom of the page that made my blood run entirely cold. There on the line marked Current Trustee was my name, Clara Miller, signed in blue ink. It wasn't my signature, but it was close, incredibly close. It had the same slightly slanted C and the specific way I looped the L. To an untrained bank teller glancing at a screen, it might have passed, but to me, it was as loud as a siren. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on every birthday card, every permission slip, every sick note sent to my teachers for 18 years. It's my mother, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My mother forged my signature. Arthur watched me carefully. Are you absolutely certain? Yes, I said, a tear of pure, hot betrayal slipping down my cheek. She used to practice my signature when I was in high school so she could sign my report cards without me seeing them. The way the R curves. It's her. The realization was a physical blow. It was one thing to yell at me. It was one thing to launch a smear campaign on Facebook. But to sit down at a table, grip a pen, and deliberately forge my name on a legal document designed to rob her own grandchildren? That required a level of cold-blooded malice I hadn't wanted to believe she was capable of. And the account number? Arthur pointed to the top of the form, where the full 10-digit routing and account numbers were neatly typed. They needed the exact trust identifiers to even submit this form. How did they get those? Do you leave your bank statements out at your house? I shook my head, my mind racing. No, I keep everything in a locked filing cabinet. I stopped, a memory from the night of the ambush suddenly snapping into sharp focus. My father leaning against the doorframe. But before that, before they had cornered me in the kitchen. When they first pulled into my driveway, my father had lingered by the street. Go on in, Barbara, he had said. I need to make a quick phone call. And my mailbox had been empty all week. My mail, I breathed, looking up at Arthur with wide eyes. The quarterly statements from First National usually arrive around the 10th of the month. My father stole my mail. That night they ambushed me. He grabbed the mail out of the box before he came inside. That's why he was standing by the door. He was holding it. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled together. The look on his face was a mixture of professional disgust and deep sympathy. So we have a coordinated conspiracy. Your father steals the mail to secure the account numbers. Your mother forges your signature. And Megan is the listed beneficiary of the crime. A true family affair. I buried my face in my hands. The nausea was overwhelming. They weren't just a toxic family. They were a cartel of emotional and financial abusers, and I was their mark. Why? I sobbed, the question torn from the deepest part of my chest. Why would they risk going to prison for this? For a house? It doesn't make any sense, Arthur. Megan said they were going to be homeless. She said the bank was breathing down her neck. But to commit felony fraud over a down payment? Arthur's expression darkened. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin manila folder. He placed it squarely in the center of the desk. That brings us to the second piece of information I acquired for you, Arthur said gently. When you emailed me the other night, outlining Megan's demands for $1 million house, something didn't add up. Real estate lenders scrutinize down payments carefully. If Megan suddenly produced $500,000 from a trust fund she didn't own, it would raise massive red flags in underwriting. So I hired a private investigator to do a preliminary asset and liability check on Megan and Kyle. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, staring at the folder. What did you find? A house of cards, Clara, Arthur said, opening the file. Your sister lied to you. She lied to your parents. She lied to everyone. He turned the first page around so I could read it. It was a summary report of public records and credit filings. First of all, Megan and Kyle are not facing foreclosure, Arthur explained, his voice steady and clinical. You cannot be foreclosed upon a property you do not own. They have been renting that trendy downtown loft for the past 4 years, and their landlord is currently beginning the eviction process because they are 3 months behind on rent. I blinked, trying to process the information. Renting? But she posts about being a homeowner all the time. She talks about their property taxes. Smoke and mirrors, Arthur said, turning to the next page. But the rent is the least of their problems. Kyle's crypto investments are entirely non-existent. He lost whatever capital he had 2 years ago. To maintain their lifestyle, the vacations, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, they have been living exclusively on credit. Arthur pointed a heavy finger at a highlighted number at the bottom of a spreadsheet. Between unsecured personal loans, maxed-out credit cards, and auto loans they are defaulting on, Megan and Kyle are currently sitting on roughly $280,000 of high-interest consumer debt. The breath left my lungs. $280,000. It was an astronomical, suffocating amount of debt. It was the kind of financial ruin that destroyed marriages and ended lives. The $1 million house they want to buy? Arthur continued, his tone turning sharp. It's real. They put an offer on a property in that gated community. They found a predatory lender willing to give them a jumbo mortgage, but only on the condition that they clear their existing debt and put down a massive cash deposit. That is why they need your children's money, Clara. The pieces fell into place with a sickening thud. The puzzle was complete, and the picture it painted was monstrous. Twist. It was never about survival. It was never about keeping a roof over her babies' heads. Megan didn't need the money to avoid the streets. She needed my dead husband's money to wipe the slate clean on her own reckless, greedy mistakes, and to fund her narcissistic delusion of being a wealthy socialite. She was willing to steal from her own 4-year-old niece to buy a mansion she couldn't afford, just so she could post pictures of it on Instagram. And my parents. My God, my parents. They had bought into Megan's lies completely, or perhaps they didn't even care. They were so conditioned to saving the golden child from the consequences of her own actions that they had willingly committed a federal offense to bail her out. They viewed me, and by extension my children, as collateral damage. Expendable. She lied, I whispered. That whole post on Facebook, playing the victim, making me look like a monster who was making her kids homeless. It was all a complete fabrication to cover up her own bankruptcy. Narcissists do not live in reality, Clara, Arthur said quietly. They live in a constructed narrative where they are always the hero or always the victim, but never the villain. When reality threatens to expose them, they will burn the world down to protect their illusion. I stared at the forged signature on the bank document. The C, the L, my mother's handwriting. In that exact moment, sitting in the quiet air-conditioned law office, something inside me died. The last fragile thread of hope I had clung to, the hope that underneath the toxicity, my parents still loved me, that my sister still cared about me, snapped. There was no love here. There was only greed, exploitation, and profound, unforgivable betrayal. The tears stopped. The shaking in my hands ceased. I felt a cold, hard shell form around my heart, sealing it shut. David had told me to protect my peace. He had told me to let Arthur be the bad guy. But looking at the evidence of their crime, I realized that I didn't want to hide behind my lawyer anymore. I wanted to look them in the eye when their house of cards collapsed. I looked up at Arthur. My voice, when I spoke, was entirely unrecognizable. It didn't belong to the quiet stagehand or the compliant daughter. It belonged to the sole trustee. Arthur, can they go to jail for this? Arthur's eyebrows raised slightly, a spark of fierce approval flashing in his gray eyes. Mail theft is a federal offense. Forgery with intent to defraud a financial institution is a felony. Yes, Clara, if we submit this to the authorities, they are looking at significant prison time. I want to set a trap, I said, my voice steady as stone. They think the request is just pending, right? The letter said it was suspended for my authorization. They don't know the bank alerted me. Correct. The bank's standard protocol is to pause the transaction until the primary account holder verifies it in person. Good, I said, leaning forward. They want the money for their fake lifestyle. They want to play games with my children's future. Let's let them think they're winning. Let's let them walk right into the bank to collect their prize. Arthur smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made him look terrifyingly formidable. He reached for his phone again. I'll call Kenneth back, Arthur said. We're going to put a hard biometric lock on the account. And then, Clara, we are going to arrange a little family reunion at First National. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in calculated silence. Arthur moved with the swift, lethal efficiency of a predator who had caught the scent of blood. He didn't just want to stop the transfer. He wanted to build an ironclad wall around my family that my parents and sister would never be able to breach again. I spent Tuesday at the law firm, signing a stack of documents that felt thicker than a phone book. Arthur and Kenneth Vance, the bank executive, coordinated a trap so flawlessly simple that it relied entirely on my family's own arrogance. Here was the plan. The bank would process the forged paperwork as if everything were perfectly normal. They would send an automated email to Megan, since she had boldly listed her own email address on the successor form, notifying her that the transfer was approved pending final in-branch signature verification. The email would invite her to come to the downtown branch of First National on Thursday at 10 a.m. to finalize the release of the funds. "They won't be able to resist," Arthur told me, tapping his gold pen against his desk. People like Megan, people who live entirely on the illusion of success, they get intoxicated when they think they've won. She won't just come alone. She'll bring your parents to celebrate. And when they sit down to claim their prize, we will be waiting. Wednesday night, I sat on the floor of my living room, watching Noah and Lily build a sprawling castle out of wooden blocks. Lily's bright laugh echoed off the walls as Noah dramatically knocked over a tower. I memorized the sound. I let it fill the hollow, aching spaces in my chest. I am doing this for them, I repeated to myself like a prayer. I have to be the villain in my mother's story so I can be the hero in my children's. Thursday morning arrived crisp and bright, the kind of clear autumn day that felt entirely inappropriate for the execution I was about to attend. I dropped the kids at school, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my palms ached. I wore a tailored black suit that David had bought for me years ago, a suit that made me feel like armor. When I pulled into the underground parking garage of First National Bank, Arthur was already waiting for me by the elevators. He wore a charcoal gray three-piece suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase that held the forensic evidence of my family's betrayal. "Are you ready, Clara?" he asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I don't think you're ever truly ready to watch your family self-destruct," I admitted, stepping into the elevator. "But I'm ready for it to be over." The downtown branch of First National was an imposing cathedral of finance. Vaulted ceilings, polished marble floors, and the hushed, reverent murmurs of tellers handling large sums of money. Arthur and I didn't go to the main floor. We were escorted directly to the executive suite on the second floor, a glass-walled conference room overlooking the lobby. Kenneth Vance, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair, greeted us. "The biometric freeze is active on the David Miller Trust," Kenneth confirmed, shaking my hand. "The funds are currently sitting in a digital purgatory. Not even the Federal Reserve could move them without your physical fingerprint on our scanners today." We sat in the back office, the blinds drawn just enough so we could see the lobby without being seen. At 9:55 a.m., the revolving doors of the bank spun and they walked in. I felt a physical jolt in my stomach, a phantom punch of childhood conditioning telling me to shrink, to hide, to apologize. But Arthur placed a steady, reassuring hand on my arm, grounding me to the present. Megan walked slightly ahead, looking like she had just stepped off a runway. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat, designer sunglasses perched on her head, carrying a leather tote bag that probably cost more than my first car. She looked triumphant. Behind her walked my parents. My mother, Barbara, had her arm linked through my father's. They were smiling. They looked like a proud family arriving to collect a lottery jackpot. They stole my mail, I thought, the anger finally burning away the last remnants of my fear. My mother forged my signature to steal from a 4-year-old, and they are smiling. A junior executive greeted them in the lobby and escorted them into a private signing room just down the hall from where Arthur and I were waiting. Through the internal camera feed on Kenneth's monitor, we watched them sit down. "Can I offer you some coffee, Ms. Miller?" the junior executive asked Megan on the screen. "No, thank you," Megan replied, her voice dripping with haughty impatience. "We really are on a tight schedule. My real estate agent is waiting for the wire transfer confirmation by noon. Let's just get these papers signed." Kenneth looked at Arthur and nodded. "Showtime." Arthur stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked down at me, his gray eyes piercing. "Remember, Clara, you do not negotiate. You do not explain. You are the sole trustee and they are criminals." I stood up, smoothing the front of my black jacket. "Let's go." We walked down the carpeted hallway, our footsteps silent. Kenneth opened the heavy oak door to the signing room without knocking. Megan was in the middle of a sentence. "And make sure the routing number for the escrow account is..." She froze. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. My mother, who had been admiring the mahogany table, snapped her head up. The polite, victorious smile instantly melted off her face, replaced by a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. My father half stood from his chair, his jaw dropping. Nobody spoke. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like the air pressure had changed. I walked into the room and took the seat directly across the table from my sister. Arthur stood behind my right shoulder, an imposing monolith of legal ruin. Kenneth stood by the door, blocking the exit. "Hello, Megan," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was terrifyingly calm. "I hear you're looking to make a wire transfer." "Clara," my mother choked out, her hand flying to her throat. What are you doing here?" "I'm the primary account holder, Mom," I said, tilting my head slightly. "The bank flagged a highly irregular request. They required my in-person authorization. Isn't that right, Mr. Vance?" "That is correct, Mrs. Miller," Kenneth said, his professional tone cutting through the panic in the room like a razor. "We received a declaration of successor trustee form on Sunday. However, our fraud department noted several discrepancies." Megan shot a panicked, wild look at our parents. Her carefully constructed facade was shattering into a million pieces. "There's been a mistake," she stammered, her voice suddenly high and reedy. "Clara and I had an agreement." "We had an agreement?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what we're calling the ambush in my kitchen? Because I distinctly remember telling you that you wouldn't get a single dime of David's money." Arthur stepped forward, unlatching his briefcase and dropping it onto the table with a heavy thud. He pulled out the forged document and slid it across the polished wood until it stopped right in front of my mother. "Barbara," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register, "I have been practicing law for 30 years. I have seen every iteration of family greed imaginable, but forging your youngest daughter's signature to liquidate your deceased son-in-law's trust fund, that is a special kind of depravity." My father finally found his voice, though it was weak and trembling. "Now listen here. You have no right to speak to my wife that way. This is a family matter. Clara, tell your lawyer to back off." "A family matter?" Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh. "Richard, when you reached into a federal mailbox to steal your daughter's bank statements to secure the account numbers, you elevated this from a family matter to a federal crime. 18 U.S. Code Section 1708. Theft or receipt of stolen mail." My father collapsed back into his chair as if Arthur had shot him. Arthur turned his gaze to my mother, who was now visibly shaking. "And you, Barbara? 18 U.S. Code Section 513. Making, uttering, or possessing a forged security of an organization. That's a Class C felony, punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison." Finally, Arthur looked at Megan, who was shrinking into her trench coat, tears of pure panic spilling over her designer sunglasses. "And Megan, attempted wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud. You are currently facing eviction and sitting on nearly $300,000 of unsecured debt. Did you really think you could steal $500,000 from a heavily monitored trust fund and no one would notice?" Megan burst into ugly, gasping sobs. The glamorous socialite was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. "Clara, please," she wailed, reaching across the table toward me. "Please, I'll lose everything. Kyle will leave me. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Mom made me do it." "Excuse me?" Barbara gasped, turning on her favorite child with shocking ferocity. "I made you do it? You were sobbing in my living room that you were going to be on the street. You begged us for the account numbers." "You're the one who practiced her signature," Megan screamed back, the loyalty between the conspirators evaporating the second the threat of prison appeared. "You said Clara was too stupid to check her statements. You said she'd never find out until the money was gone." I sat there, perfectly still, watching my family tear each other to shreds in a corporate boardroom. It was pathetic, it was disgusting, and it was exactly what they deserved. "Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a cold authority that snapped their attention back to me. The bickering stopped. They looked at me, their eyes wide and terrified, finally realizing that the quiet, compliant stagehand they had bullied for 32 years held their entire lives in the palm of her hand. "Clara, sweetie," my mother started, the tears flowing freely now, adopting the trembling, vulnerable victim voice she had perfected over decades. "We were desperate. We made a terrible, terrible mistake, but we are your family, your blood. You can't send your own mother to prison. You know your father's heart can't take the stress. Please, have mercy." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel small, invisible, and indebted. "You didn't have mercy on Noah," I said quietly. My mother flinched. "You didn't have mercy on Lily," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You looked at two children who had just lost their father, and you saw a bank account. You saw a way to fund Megan's delusions. You didn't come here today with a heavy heart, Mom. You walked into this bank smiling. You were celebrating the fact that you successfully robbed me." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. I looked down at the three of them, feeling a profound, liberating emptiness where my guilt used to be. "I am not pressing criminal charges today," I said. A collective, massive sigh of relief shuddered through the three of them. Megan slumped forward onto the table. "But," Arthur interjected, his voice cracking like a whip, "that is highly conditional." Arthur pulled a second stack of papers from his briefcase. First National Bank is placing a permanent non-expiring fraud alert on the David Miller Trust. If any of you so much as call this branch and utter the name Clara Miller, the bank will automatically notify the FBI. Kenneth nodded gravely. "That is standard policy for documented forgery attempts, yes." "Second," Arthur continued, sliding 3 legal packets across the table. "These are cease and desist orders. You are legally barred from contacting Clara, Noah, or Lily. No phone calls. No text messages, no showing up at her house, no sending proxy family members to guilt trip her. If you violate this order, Clara will immediately hand the forged documents and the bank's security footage over to the district attorney's office. Your freedom is contingent on your absolute, permanent silence." My father stared at the papers, looking 20 years older than he had when he walked into the room. "You're cutting us off," he whispered. "You're taking our grandchildren away from us." "No, Dad," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "You threw your grandchildren away the second you decided their college fund was Megan's emergency bailout. Sign the papers." They didn't argue. The fight had been completely drained out of them. With shaking hands, my mother, my father, and my sister signed the cease and desist orders, effectively erasing themselves from my life. When they finished, they stood up. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody offered a final apology. They shuffled out of the conference room, heads bowed, stripped of their arrogance and their illusions. Through the glass walls, I watched them walk across the grand lobby and out the revolving doors, disappearing into the crowded city streets. I stood in the silence of the boardroom, my heart pounding a steady, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. "You did phenomenally well, Clara," Arthur said gently, packing the signed orders back into his briefcase. "You didn't give them an inch." "I had a good teacher," I replied, thinking of David. I left the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy, suffocating coat of family guilt had been unbuttoned and left on the mahogany table. I was free, or so I thought. I had underestimated the sheer, terrifying resilience of a narcissist denied their prize. I thought the threat of federal prison would be enough to keep them away. I thought the legal barricade Arthur built would hold. But a narcissist doesn't view a boundary as a wall. They view it as a challenge. 2 weeks passed in blissful, uninterrupted silence. The cease and desist orders seemed to be working. Megan's social media went entirely dark. I didn't receive a single passive-aggressive text from an extended relative. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I could actually breathe in my own home. I focused on my work. I baked cookies with Noah. I painted Lily's fingernails bright pink. But beneath the surface, the poison was still working its way through my family's system. The debt Megan had accumulated hadn't vanished. The eviction notice on her luxury loft was still pending. The desperation was mutating into something far more dangerous. The gaslighting campaign didn't start with my parents. It started with the flying monkeys. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at the grocery store pushing a cart down the cereal aisle when an older woman stepped out from behind a display of oatmeal. It was Aunt Susan, my father's sister. "Clara," she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. I stopped my cart, my heart doing a nervous stutter step. "Aunt Susan, I'm just finishing up my shopping. I've been trying to call you, but you apparently blocked my number," she said, crossing her arms. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "Your mother is in the hospital, Clara. Did you even know?" The air left my lungs. The biological reflex of a daughter hearing her mother is hurt kicked in instantly, bypassing the legal walls and the betrayal. What happened? Is it her heart? Oh, Susan let out a bitter scoff. It's stress, complete physical exhaustion from a nervous breakdown. And you want to know why? Because her youngest daughter threatened to send her to federal prison over a misunderstanding about some paperwork. I gripped the handle of the shopping cart so hard the metal bit into my palms. Aunt Susan, it wasn't a misunderstanding. She forged my signature to steal. Stop it, Susan hissed, looking around to see if anyone was listening. Your mother was just trying to help your sister consolidate some loans. You know Megan isn't good with paperwork. Barbara was trying to keep the family together, and you sicked a corporate shark of a lawyer on her. She hasn't stopped crying for 2 weeks. She thinks you hate her. I don't hate her, I said, my voice trembling. But she broke the law. She tried to take David's money. David is dead, Clara, Susan snapped, the cruelty of her words echoing in the cereal aisle. And he's making you act like a monster from the grave. Your father is beside himself. Megan's husband left her because of the financial stress you caused by pulling out of your promise to help them. You destroyed your sister's marriage. My jaw dropped. The narrative they had spun to the extended family was a masterpiece of fiction. They had completely omitted the forgery, the mail theft, and the $300,000 in secret debt. They had framed me as a wealthy, vindictive widow who had gleefully broken a promise to buy Megan a house, intentionally destroying her marriage and giving my mother a heart attack in the process. I didn't cause Megan's debt, I whispered, the grocery store light suddenly feeling entirely too bright. And I never promised them anything. You need to fix this, Susan ordered, leaning in close. You need to call Arthur, or whatever that lawyer's name is, and you need to drop these ridiculous cease and desist orders. You need to go to the hospital and apologize to your mother. If you don't, Clara, I swear to God you will not have a single piece of family left in this world. We will all wash our hands of you. She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing alone next to the Cheerios. The psychological warfare had officially begun. They couldn't attack the bank account anymore, so they were going to attack my sanity. They were going to weaponize my extended family, my empathy, and my deeply ingrained fear of abandonment. They were going to try and make the isolation so painful that I would willingly dismantle the fortress myself just to be allowed back into the fold. I abandoned my cart and practically ran to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, the panic attacks I hadn't had since David's funeral clawing their way back up my throat. Was I too harsh? The treacherous, conditioned voice in my head whispered. Maybe Mom didn't realize how serious the forgery was. Maybe she just panicked. Now she's in the hospital. Megan is getting a divorce. I did this. I broke the family. The gaslighting was working. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, making me doubt my own reality. But then I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It was 6:15 p.m. I needed to get home to relieve the babysitter. I needed to feed Noah and Lily. The thought of my children acted like an ice water plunge. The fog of guilt dissipated. If I went to that hospital, if I dropped the legal orders, it wouldn't end there. The demands would start again. The extortion would resume. The trust fund would be in jeopardy the moment I let them back in. I started the car and drove home. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't drop the orders. Over the next month, the campaign escalated. I received letters in the mail from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, begging me to find God and forgive my parents. A bouquet of black roses was left on my front porch with no note. My father left a tearful 3-minute voicemail on my work phone, somehow bypassing the block, sobbing about how he had failed as a protector and how my cruelty was killing him. It was a daily, agonizing test of endurance. I was functioning on very little sleep, jumping at every shadow, terrified that the next knock on the door would be my family coming to drag me back into the nightmare. And then, late one November night, the nightmare finally managed to break into my house. It was a Tuesday night, 2 days before Thanksgiving. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets slick with a freezing November rain. I had put the kids to bed hours ago and was dozing on the living room sofa with a book on my chest. I woke up to a sound that made my blood run instantly cold. It wasn't a loud crash. It was the soft, unmistakable sound of glass shattering in the kitchen, followed by the subtle click of the back door unlocking. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but Noah and Lily were upstairs. I slid off the sofa, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and grabbed the heavy brass fireplace poker from the hearth. My hands were shaking so violently the metal clattered against the stone, but the intruder didn't seem to hear it over the sound of the rain. I crept down the dark hallway, pressing my back against the wall. A flashlight beam danced across the kitchen tile, sweeping toward my home office at the back of the house. I followed the light, my breath caught in my throat. The intruder was in David's old office. I heard the sound of drawers being pulled open, papers being frantically shoved aside. Then, a heavy grunt. I stepped into the doorway, both hands gripping the brass poker, ready to swing. I reached out and slammed the palm of my hand against the light switch. The room flooded with harsh overhead light. The intruder dropped the flashlight and spun around, shielding his eyes. It was my father. He was soaking wet, wearing a dark raincoat, his silver hair plastered to his forehead. And in his hands he was holding the small, fireproof lockbox where I kept my personal documents before moving them to the bank. The box that still held my old checkbooks, tax returns, and copies of my signature. For a second, the universe seemed to stop spinning. The man who had taught me how to ride a bike, the man who had walked me down the aisle, was standing in my home office at 2 a.m, dripping rainwater onto the rug, holding my lockbox like a common thief. "Dad," I whispered, the word tasting like bile. "What are you doing?" Richard froze, his eyes darting frantically around the room. But the terrifying thing wasn't the panic. It was how quickly he tried to pivot back to the gaslighting. "Clara," he gasped, putting on a terrible, unconvincing smile. "Thank God you're awake. The neighborhood watch called me. They said they saw someone prowling around your backyard. I came over to check, and the back window was broken. I was just securing your valuables for you." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. "You broke the window," I said, my voice dead and hollow. "You broke into my house to steal from me. Again." "No, Clara, sweetie, you're confused," he started, taking a step toward me. "Do not take another step," I screamed, raising the heavy brass poker. I didn't care that he was my father. In that moment, he was a threat to my children. "Put the box down. Put it down on the floor, right now." Richard saw the absolute murder in my eyes. He realized the quiet, compliant stagehand was gone forever. Slowly, he bent down and placed the lockbox on the carpet. "You are sick, Clara," he sneered, the friendly facade dropping, revealing the ugly, desperate man underneath. "You are tearing this family apart over a few dollars." "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for the phone on the desk without taking my eyes off him. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my house before I press send." "You wouldn't dare," he challenged, though his voice wavered. "Try me." I punched in the 9, then the 1. My father cursed under his breath, a vile, hateful word, and pushed past me. He practically ran down the hallway and out the back door, disappearing into the rainy night. I locked the door, boarded up the broken window with a piece of plywood, and sat on the kitchen floor until the sun came up, the fireplace poker resting on my lap. At 8 a.m., I called Arthur. I didn't cry. I simply gave him the facts. My father had broken into my home to steal my documents. The cease and desist orders hadn't worked. They were escalating. "I am so incredibly sorry, Clara," Arthur said, his voice heavy with a grim realization. "But Richard's desperation confirms something I suspected. I didn't want to tell you this unless it became absolutely necessary, but your husband was a brilliant man. David anticipated that a legal wall might not be enough to stop them." "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone. "When David and I drafted the trust, we included a poison pill," Arthur explained. "A hidden clause. It's an aggressive legal mechanism known as an in terrorem, or no contest clause, but we expanded it. David stipulated that if your immediate family, specifically your parents or sister, attempted any legal or physical interference with the trust or your guardianship, it would automatically trigger a countersuit funded entirely by a separate, hidden life insurance policy David took out just for legal defense." I blinked, stunned. "David set up a war chest?" "Exactly. But more importantly, the clause acts as a definitive trigger for a permanent, non-negotiable restraining order. Not just a cease and desist, Clara. A criminal restraining order. And Richard just pulled the trigger by breaking into your home. However," Arthur paused, his tone shifting. "Before we can file the police report and activate the clause, they just made their final desperate move." "What did they do?" "I was just served with papers an hour ago," Arthur said heavily. "Clara, your parents and Megan aren't just trying to steal the money anymore. They filed an emergency petition in family court. They are suing you for full custody of Noah and Lily. The room spun. The floor seemed to drop out from underneath me. They're claiming that your grief has triggered severe paranoia and mental instability, Arthur continued, reading from the document. They are citing your estrangement from the family, your irrational hoarding of resources, and they have an affidavit from your Aunt Susan claiming you exhibited signs of a nervous breakdown in a grocery store. They are telling the judge that you are an unfit mother and that they need to take the children to protect them. It was the ultimate betrayal. The nuclear option. They couldn't get the money by going through me, so they were trying to take my children away to get direct control of the trust fund. Arthur, I choked out, the terror threatening to drown me. Can they win? Can they actually take my babies? Not on my watch, Arthur growled, a fierce, terrifying protector. They just walked into a courtroom where they have to swear under penalty of perjury. They think they can gaslight a judge the way they gaslighted you. They are about to find out what happens when a narcissist's lies meet the absolute, unforgiving reality of the law. Get dressed, Clara. We are going to court. The family court building was a bleak, concrete structure that smelled of floor wax and despair. I sat at the petitioner's table next to Arthur. My hands were folded tightly in my lap, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Across the aisle sat my family. Megan wore a conservative, modest dress, her hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, playing the role of the concerned, stable aunt perfectly. My mother clutched a tissue, dabbing at her dry eyes. My father sat stiffly in his suit, projecting an aura of patriarchal concern. They had hired a flashy, expensive lawyer, likely paid for with the last of Megan's credit limit. Judge Harmon, a stern, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, presided over the hearing. My family's lawyer went first. He painted a tragic, heartbreaking picture. He described a grieving widow who had lost her mind. He talked about how I had cruelly cut off the loving grandparents, how I was isolating the children, and how my behavior at the grocery store proved I was suffering from a psychotic break. Your Honor, the opposing lawyer concluded, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. The Miller family is simply trying to save these two innocent children from a mother who is spiraling out of control. We ask for immediate, temporary emergency custody to be granted to the grandparents, Richard and Barbara. Judge Harmon looked over her glasses at Arthur. Mr. Vance, how does your client respond to these serious allegations? Arthur stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up his thick manila folder, and walked to the center of the courtroom. He didn't look like a lawyer defending a case. He looked like an executioner reading a sentence. Your Honor, Arthur began, his voice echoing in the silent room. The petition before you is not an act of familial love. It is the final, desperate act of a coordinated criminal conspiracy to commit financial fraud against two minor children. The opposing lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection! Inflammatory! Overruled, Judge Harmon said, leaning forward, suddenly very interested. Proceed, Mr. Vance. The petitioners claim my client is isolating them due to paranoia, Arthur said, pulling a document from his folder. I present Exhibit A, a cease and desist order, signed by all three petitioners 3 weeks ago. They agreed to stay away from my client after they were caught attempting to forge her signature to liquidate a $500,000 trust fund. Arthur handed the document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The color drained entirely from my family's table. Megan let out a tiny, choked gasp. Your Honor, Arthur continued relentlessly, I present Exhibit B, security footage and sworn affidavits from the executive branch of First National Bank, confirming that Barbara Miller forged the signature, while Richard Miller stole the bank statements from my client's federal mailbox to secure the routing numbers. This is outrageous, my father yelled, standing up. We were trying to help. Sit down, Mr. Miller, or I will have you removed in handcuffs, Judge Harmon snapped, her eyes scanning the bank documents with growing horror. And finally, Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. They claim they can provide a stable home for the children. I present Exhibit C, a comprehensive financial asset report on the sister, Megan. She is currently facing eviction, owes nearly $300,000 in consumer debt, and her husband filed for divorce 2 days ago. They do not want custody of these children. They want control of the trust fund to pay off their catastrophic debts. The courtroom was dead silent. The illusion was completely, utterly shattered. The gaslighting didn't work in a room governed by evidence. Wait, Richard suddenly stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Megan. We didn't know about the eviction. We didn't know about the debt. Megan told us the bank made an error on her mortgage. She said she just needed a bridge loan. Twist. The ultimate poetic justice. When the ship started sinking, the narcissists turned on each other. You liar! Megan shrieked, jumping to her feet, entirely abandoning her modest aunt persona. You knew everything. You're the one who said Clara wouldn't fight back. You're the one who broke the window at her house to steal the papers. Judge Harmon slammed her gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Order! Order in this court! The judge looked at the three of them with a level of disgust that was almost palpable. Petition for emergency custody is denied with extreme prejudice, Judge Harmon declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented by Mr. Vance, I am immediately issuing a permanent 5-year restraining order against Richard Miller, Barbara Miller, and Megan Miller. You are not to come within 500 yards of Clara Miller or her children. Mr. Vance, I highly suggest you forward these exhibits to the District Attorney's Fraud Division. Already done, Your Honor, Arthur replied smoothly. It was over. The gavel fell one last time. My family sat frozen at their table, the ruins of their lives crashing down around them. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably. My father stared blankly at the wall. Megan was looking around wildly, as if waiting for someone to save her. Nobody did. I stood up, picked up my purse, and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back at them. I didn't need to. They were ghosts to me now. A year later, life looked completely different. The district attorney had indeed picked up the case. Faced with federal charges, my parents and sister had turned on each other entirely, taking plea deals to avoid prison time. They received heavy probation, massive fines, and permanent felony records. Megan's husband divorced her, and she was forced to declare bankruptcy. My parents had to sell their home to pay their legal fees and Megan's remaining debts. They lived in a small apartment 2 towns over, completely cut off from the extended family who had finally seen the truth. I stood on the front porch of my house, holding a mug of warm coffee. It was Thanksgiving morning. Inside, the house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon. Noah, now 8, was teaching 5-year-old Lily how to throw a football in the front yard. Arthur arrived a few minutes later, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider for the kids and a bottle of wine for me. He had become a fixture in our lives, not just as a lawyer, but as the fiercely protective uncle my children deserved. Happy Thanksgiving, Clara, Arthur smiled, watching the kids play. The trust fund is healthy. The market was kind this quarter. Thank you, Arthur, I said, leaning against the porch railing. For everything. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the crisp autumn air on my face. I thought about David. I thought about the fortress he had built to protect us. It had held. The walls had withstood the siege, and the monsters had been banished to the dark. I am Clara Miller. I am 33 years old, and I learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Sometimes protecting your children means becoming the villain in your family's story. Sometimes love means drawing a line in the sand and refusing to be moved. Money reveals people's true character, but adversity reveals your true strength. They thought I was a stagehand. They thought I was weak, but they forgot that a mother protecting her young will burn the entire theater to the ground to keep them safe. And I don't regret lighting the match for a single second.